All right, welcome everyone. Master Plan Committee meeting number 15. Welcome to March and hopefully spring this weekend. Spring into, yeah, everything that comes with spring. Sorry. And welcome to everyone, committee members, and also to members of the public. I see we have a good number of folks. Hopefully this isn't your first time with us. Hopefully you've came to all of our open houses and our community meetings and supported our surveys, and hopefully we'll see you at future committee meetings. And not to mention, not to get ahead of everything, we do have an open house, the third open house as part of this series, which is March 30th. And that'll be starts at 6:30. And that'll be on this Zoom platform. So if you haven't registered, please register. Um, we'll have a great crowd yet again. And so folks that are new, this is the Designing Dedham 2030 Master Plan process, where we put together a 10-year master plan that goes through a variety of topics, from housing to business development to transportation to governance to community facilities and a whole host of stuff in between. And we've been at this diligently, as you can see, community meeting number 15, 15 straight months. This committee has been meeting diligently and in addition to with the public. And so again, tipping my hat to the committee members. Once again, on a Tuesday night, you're showing up, and we have great attendance every meeting. So once again, thank you, everyone. And, we talked about we weren't going to have a meeting tonight, but so thank you all that had to, shove stuff out of the way to make it tonight. So thank you all. And again, appreciate you being here. So typical protocols that we go through. Of course, hopefully everyone consented to being recorded, and I will advise folks that if you ever want to see previous meetings on our website, designingdedham2030.org, you can find all of our committee meetings, our community meetings, and all the videos that go with that. Of course, please mute your audio. Um, and as Josh alluded to, we're keeping all the videos of committee members on right now, and community members are off. And of course, at the end of the meeting, we provide a public comment as always, and we encourage everyone to participate. Thank you, Carolina, for the project website. And that's the resource for all that is Designing Dedham 2030. And of course, if you have questions during the comment period, and also I would definitely encourage committee members, and we've been very diligent with this. If you have questions or you would like to be recognized, please raise your hand. It makes it a bit easier. Unfortunately, we're not in person. We can't see everyone. But so if you have a question or a comment, please raise your hand so you can be recognized. Thank you, Josh. And of course, here's our illustrious steering committee. Again, thank you for being here tonight and as being diligent on for the past 15 months of going through and wading through all these topic areas, coming up with some goals. And, we'll talk a little bit about next steps, but starting to put some specific strategies to that goals is our next phase. And I look forward to the next couple meetings, or more than a couple meetings, but thank you, everyone. And of course, my name is Jeremy Rosenberger, Planning Director. We're joined by Michelle Tinger, a planning assistant here, Josh Fiala, our consultant from MAPC, along with Carolina Prieto, who's also from MAPC and been diligently meeting with us every 14 meetings. And so we thank you for your tenacity and dealing with us and keeping us motivated and keeping the comments and making us providing all the questions. So thank you, Josh. Yeah, this slide. And so as we all talk to all committee members, this is a special meeting. We weren't going to meet this meeting, but we wanted to recognize that there was at the end of our meeting, there was a comment made, and some folks, it was a kind of a turning point and kind of a pause. And we wanted to make sure that we have a discussion tonight because it comes back to our committee values and expectations. And so, like I said, a comment was made by a committee member at our last meeting that was inappropriate and it should have been called out at that time. And it should not have been ignored, except, one committee member actually spoke up. And unfortunately, there was silence on my part. And, and I'll talk further about that. And so, as you see on the screen, we proclaim these committee values and expectations. These were developed right from the start, and this was not us guiding you. This was derived from this group, and you put your heads together and put together to paper how we want to function as a group. And there was an amazing exercise, And so just, quickly, I'm going to go through these again. Open-mindedness, respect, addressing conflict, organized, transparent, goal-minded, and respecting history without fearing change. So I want to, this is my statement. I'm actually going to hand it over to the committee chairs to make, they're going to express some words too. And before we actually open to a greater dialogue. But, for myself as the project manager for the master plan process and often a facilitator at our meetings, I myself failed to live up to these expectations at our last meeting by not addressing this violation of our values that occurred. I apologize to the group and myself and anyone else to that. It's my responsibility to ensure that every community meeting fulfills our agreed upon values and by remaining silent, I help create an unsafe and unwelcoming space for committee members and the community as a whole. I should have addressed the conflict immediately. And so again, tonight, we're here to provide an open conversation among committee members to discuss last meeting's incident further, and furthermore, that the Designing Dedham 2030 master plan process is equitable and inclusive. And I want to emphasize, these are words we want to ensure, and our actions speak louder than these words. Prior to that, I want to articulate that I will strive to do better and hope we can all work together to ensure the committee values and expectations are not just these words on the screen, but actually put into action. And so thank you all, and thank you for this moment, expressing my feelings. And it's a tough subject, but we're a group and we put these values together, and now it's time to put these into practice. So with that, I want to hand it over to co-committee chair Jessica Porter, who would like to say a few words. Thank you, everyone.
Great. Thanks, Jeremy. So I also want to just apologize and take responsibility that I personally and that we as a leadership team didn't do a good job of upholding that value, in particular of addressing conflict when it arises. I think Zoom is filled with awkward pauses, but I think you can tell the difference between an awkward pause and a pregnant pause. and and I really regret that we kind of let that sit there. And so I think it's awkward. It's hindsight is hard, but I think it's really important that we all commit, and I want to commit to all of you, to the committee members and by extension to the community as a large, that I will make every effort to make sure that we're actually addressing those kinds of pauses, right? That we're having the difficult conversations. I wish very much that at our last meeting, we'd really just taken the time to kind of clarify remarks. I think that would have been really helpful in terms of having everybody leave in a more productive place. And I just want to recommit to all of you that I'll make sure that our meetings, our committee meetings, are a safe space for everyone on the committee and the public to speak openly and honestly. I'm committed to protecting that space. I'm committed to doing what I can do to facilitate tough conversations when they need to be had. And I'm also really, I guess the reason I'm really committed to that is I think that the strength of our master plan really depends on it, right? That we have to make sure that we can have those conversations, that everyone can share perspectives and hear perspectives, and we can have different perspectives, right? Do so respectfully. But really make sure that we are being inclusive of everyone in order to create a plan which is going to reflect the needs of the full community. So that's my commitment, and I really appreciate everybody being here tonight and having the willingness to have the conversation. So I'll hand it over to Sierra.
Thanks, Jess, and trying not to be repetitive, but also to reflect the evaluation and sort of self-evaluation that I know I and many others have conducted since our last meeting. I too was disappointed by my lack of action towards taking the moment to clarify and review factual data, sort of representations of people and their beliefs in that moment. As I was thinking back on really why I know many of you on the committee got involved in this effort, it really has to do with the opportunity we have to talk about issues broadly and deeply and in the long term. And that is unique for a community and for residents to be tasked with something like that. And I am taking to heart and embracing the fact that our responsibility that comes along with that opportunity is to ensure that the conversations are include representation from all members of our community. So I know that we have worked very hard on outreach, and I know we can do better. We'll talk about that more later tonight, but want to add that, you know, I personally will be keeping an eye on who's at the table, who's not at the table, and why, and ensuring that we keep that lens of representation, of curiosity, of sort of respect and clarity around data and shared values as we move forward. So thanks everybody for making the time tonight. We felt it was important not to wait until April.
Great. Thank you, Sarah, and Jeremy, and Jessica for sharing all of that. I too would like to acknowledge, before framing the meeting this evening, that I didn't live up to expectations as a leader of this process, and agree with the others that my silence at the end of our last meeting was unacceptable, and I apologize for it. I'd also like to acknowledge that as a leader who is a white male, not addressing conflict in that moment sends signals that rightfully raise concerns about this process, its leaders, and whether or not we want this to be inclusive as an effort for the town that is welcoming of all voices. The answer to all that is yes, a resounding yes. We are trying to be inclusive and welcoming, but I expect that we have some repair work to do now as a process and as a group. I recommit myself to leading a transparent process that addresses conflict in the moment, to reinforce that these are safe discussion spaces for all voices. As you'll see in our brief presentation this evening, we are leaning into this moment as a point of reflection on race, equity, and inclusion in our process and the planned content as it has been developed to date. This evening, I'll try to give a brief framing of race and equity in the plan to help set the stage for the committee discussion, both addressing concerns about the ending of our last meeting, but also the process more generally and the content so far that we have for the plan. After the committee discussion, we'll discuss efforts underway to expand the inclusive outreach. And then we'll briefly remind you all, of course, about the March open house and next steps for the process. And then because we have a little different setup this evening where we're focusing on the committee members first, we'll be sure to leave ample room for the public comment period before we adjourn for this evening. So this presentation reflects on some of the ways race and equity have been examined in our planning process to date, with the hope that we can turn our conversation this evening toward the plan and reflect on ways to improve diversity, inclusion, and equity in this process and its recommendations. In the spirit of transparency and addressing conflict, we need to acknowledge that the current context of this moment in regard to race in Dedham. I'm certainly not in a position to speak to the details of what is occurring in the town, but recognize that the current dialogue has raised the level of anxiety and conflict around race in the community and exposed differences in where people are in their own personal evolution, reckoning with the systemic racism and moving toward a more equitable and just society. The master plan cannot be separated from that tension and must lean into it and define a more meaningful and effective set of actions the town and community can undertake over the next 10 years, so that this conversation is different in 2030 than what it has been in 2020. You all recall from the initial community survey, we've known that the Dedham community values being inclusive as one of the top 3 overall goals. Our challenge is to move that from an undefined word without direction to a clearly defined set of goals, strategies, and actions that will result in a more inclusive town. The legacies of systemic racism are all around us. As we saw in the personal story shared with the committee recently in the email regarding the I Am Dedham video, which hopefully many of you watched. I watched. It was very informative and a nice personal reflection on what we're seeing in the data and facts and figures in the process. and what Alex Kopelman from our team shared in his housing topic presentation with the redlining map that he shared with us. It's a clear and tangible example of part of the town's history that was not inclusive. Of course, redlining is not the only type of racial discrimination that has occurred in the region or in Dedham over the centuries or recent decades. Nor are discriminatory practices confined only to the past, as many in our communities are painfully aware of. For example, the Great Recession caused by the subprime mortgage crisis and the housing market collapse that followed had a disproportionate impact on households of color. Additionally, the recovery period from 2009 to 2011, or for some families extending well beyond that time, was a time in which Black households continued to lose wealth, whereas white households recovered and gained wealth. In current news, the health and economic impacts of COVID-19, of course, are having a disproportionate impact on people of color. These inequitable outcomes continue today all around us. The legacy of redlining and discriminatory housing practices show up in the neighborhood incomes and rents today. The disinvestment and isolation that has occurred due to these policies have set neighboring geographies on different paths, and the opportunities for prosperity and building of wealth are not equitably distributed among them. These same patterns show up in environmental justice populations, which are identified with a similar geography for East Dedham as where redlining occurred, we saw on the previous slide, and in the block group that contains the relatively recent apartment complexes near the corporate center T-Stop. Environmental justice populations are defined by either annual median household income equal to or less than 65% of the statewide median income, 25% or more residents identifying as a race other than white, or 25% or more household members that don't speak English or don't speak English well. And of course, these patterns and policies have impacted the overall town demographics, where the white population is dominant because they have been given access and advantages that other races have not, similar to many other suburban municipalities of the region. These demographic patterns are not an accident. For this meeting, I've reviewed our current draft goals across all topics and isolated the goals I think are directly focused on equity. This includes 11 goals across a variety of topics. Other goals definitely relate to the issues of equity, such as those around affordable housing or multimodal transportation, but those are not listed here as we focus more directly on equity. The questions we need to reflect on collectively are: one, are these enough? And two, do they represent the actual needs of the target populations that have so far been underrepresented in this process? So we'll end up leaving this screen, but we might need to revisit it or maybe pull it up again when we're in the discussion if we need to use it as a reference. Additionally, we can define this list more specifically to focus on racial equity, and about half of the goals remain directly addressing the issue of racial equity. As we've been acknowledging in this presentation, past planning policies and processes have promoted systemic racism, sometimes purposefully, sometimes unintentionally. A more recent era of plans have recognized environmental justice populations and have begun to acknowledge the need for inclusion and equity. But the present need is to move beyond recognition and to effect real change through goals, strategies, and actions we are currently developing as a group. So again, the question we need to ask ourselves is: one, are these enough, those now outlined in yellow on the screen, to address racial equity in the town? And two, do they represent the actual needs of the target populations, again, that have so far been underrepresented in this process? Although it makes me conscious of my own privilege and biases and exposes them when I say this, I'm grateful for this moment to reflect on our process and draft content, to provide us an honest assessment of where we are and that we have time and effort remaining in this process to act on that assessment and to properly address equity and inclusion over the next 10 years for Dedham through this plan. So it's just a little framing for our conversation this evening. As we turn toward open committee discussion, we thought additional guidelines would be helpful to create discussion space where we can live into the values expressed by the committee and hopefully engage in an open, honest, and safe dialogue. The additional guidance includes take space and make space so that everyone has time to share. I think a very helpful guideline is to use the easy phrases of oops and ouch. Oops if you make a mistake in what you've been saying or your statement maybe comes off the wrong way, and ouch if someone says something that's hurtful. We all need to trust that we are engaging in a way that's not meant to harm and trust the intentions of others' words. Use I statements. My experience and perspective is not the same as yours, nor am I representing an entire group, even if I am a part of that group. One mic, let's not interrupt each other, and let's actively listen to the points raised by all and give our full active listening to the speaker of the moment, while remembering to make space for others. Finally, we encourage all committee members to participate in this discussion. If you wish not to participate, we understand that as well. If you wish to make a comment but don't want to state it verbally, we do offer you the opportunity to send a direct message through the chat function to Carolina, and she can read that message to the group without attribution. We ask non-committee members to make note of thoughts that they have as this discussion is occurring and save them for the end of the meeting during the public comment period. In this case, we want to reserve the discussion space initially for committee members only. So we hope everyone understands that and respects it. With that in mind, all of that as context, and the conversation really can focus on any of the issues which are before us, the ending of last meeting, where we're headed in this process, the process itself, the content that I alluded to in terms of where the draft goals currently are, all of that's open in this discussion. With that in mind, I will stop speaking and open the floor for discussion by committee members.
Thank you, Josh.
Thanks, Josh. And you're going to put the slides down too, right? So we can see each other.
Yes, thank you for the reminder.
Yeah, thanks.
And if also a reminder, if you put yourselves into grid view, it might be helpful just so you can see the room, and it looks like the committee members are isolated because of our video logistics. Looks like first up we have Jay with his hand up. Jay, it looks like you're muted. I think you have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, thank you. I believe I owe the group the apology with the late night and the long pause. My statement was not to give an insult to anybody, disrespect anybody, to disinclude anybody. What I was trying to explain, which I wasn't too articulate with, was my personal experiences growing up. There's also a time frame there from 1979 to the present age, are almost two different worlds from my experience. And I with making those, trying to be honest with, even though it may be baggage to some people or even to myself, I may be tripping over my own words. I wanted to be honest with in my upbringing. My change of culture was restricted to a certain group of people. My even when the friends that I have today, I do not have to talk in full sentences, because pretty much we can think, we almost think alike, which is not a good experience, because you don't come to understand other people. I've grown over that time, because I've been in the service. I've also a union member, which works with all cultures under the sun, and I'm better for it. What I was trying to bring forward was, again, that personal experience, to ask, why was Dedham so secluded to basically to a certain set of people? Why were some certain set of people allowed? As I said, I lived in subsidized housing. My father was a veteran, and that's where that came from. But the same token, during this 1968, they brought in the other housing, and again, that didn't really reflect a total population. And again, it was trying to bring forward that this is what my surroundings were. I did review Iron and Dedham, and I think more articulately that expressed my intent, especially at the end of it, when the gentleman was explaining the how the deeds were changed and were seclusive, and that the banking situations did not bring in different groups of people, that they were only set for one group of persons, and knowing that I'm privileged. I think that's what I was trying to bring forward, my honesty. I do owe an apology to Shauna, because I should have called her the very next day, which I did not. I'm not going to make an excuse for it, but I do owe her an apology, because I should have called her the next day to try to explain what I'm saying now. And in some ways, though, maybe this stumbling block has come out. It's good for me to be more sensitive to other people's feelings, and maybe this helps this group overall, as much as it's been disruptive. And so again, I just want to express my apology for any comments that have hurt anybody, and it's been disruptive to the group as a whole.
Thank you, Jay.
Yeah, thanks, Jay, for that reflection. Looks like Josh, I think I saw your hand go up next.
Thanks, other Josh. I appreciate it. So I guess I wanted to, at the start of this conversation, just you had put up some of the goals that have been covered over the course of these 14 meetings that we think can address some issues of equity and inclusion. And so I think the conversations that have been happening around town the past year or so, let's call it, I think too often are about what makes people the least uncomfortable. This concept of pacing for privilege, which is kind of, what change can we make that's going to make the people that are most resistant to change the most comfortable? And so there's a lot of conversation about, we need to make sure both sides are happy with whatever we do, or whatever both sides mean when it comes to the issue of people feeling represented and valued in our community. I'm not sure what the other side of that is. But what I'm hoping for this group, at least, is when we look at those goals and we think about what we can accomplish in our master plan, thinking about the next 10 years in town, when it comes to issues of equity and inclusion and anything else that would make a noticeable and meaningful impact on people's lives that have chosen to live here or work here or whatever it might be, that we don't think so much about what's going to make people the least upset or uncomfortable, but we start with the idea of what's going to make the biggest impact. And then we can work backwards from there. But if we start always with the least meaningful change because it's going to offend the least amount of people, that's actually not doing anything. And so I'm hoping that when we look at all those goals, that we think just in that lens. People are at this point demanding evidence that there's any problem here in this town or otherwise. And you showed some evidence, and we saw some evidence in the I Am Dedham video. I've heard direct evidence from students and former students in our schools, families, parents. There's evidence, it's there. The problem is, I think, whatever evidence is presented will just be disputed in some way, shape, or form. We don't need to be demanding evidence. We don't need to be demanding that we have, this isn't a courtroom. People are telling us there's a problem both here and outside of our community. And Dedham is not unique, but what Dedham is on the verge of possibly becoming unique is our resistance to the change, while towns around us possibly wake up to this reality a lot sooner than us. And I think that's what could make us unique going forward. So that's my plea to this committee, that we think about what can make the biggest impact, and let's start there, and we'll work backwards from there. That's my personal opinion. Thanks.
Thank you for that, Josh. Nathan, I see your hand up.
Sorry, on my phone and trying to find the mute. Thanks. Yeah, so I agree that we should sort of define what we want, and I think we've approached diversity a strange way. It's written into the town's mission statement. It's a goal of our master plan, but like in the goals, we're kind of tangentially touching on it, and so I guess I would support some very specific, just a section on diversity, inclusion, equity, inclusion, et cetera, and defining it a little bit more as a standalone. And I know, a lot of other pieces will support that throughout the master plan. The different areas will support each other. But I would like to, I sent in my email, just make sure that we are measuring it in meaningful ways, transparent about what it means. I know it might take some time to think through what we want to measure, but I would like to. I mean, it's important to me. It's important. It seems like to the town. It's in our mission statement. I think it's important to this master plan, but I do think we can be more explicit about that is how we envision the town, and that there are improvements there are part of what we'd like to see, and be very explicit about the types of things that we're talking about, from representation in elected officials, non-elected officials, contractors, opportunities. I think there's a lot of things that we could go into then. So anyways, that's all.
Great, thank you for that, Nathan. I'll just throw out, not to take up too much time following my own guidelines, but it could be elevated by the committee, similar to what we've seen with walkability showing up in many categories of topics, as was highlighted on those slides. Equity and inclusion aspects of goals have shown up across all topics. So this could be another cross-cutting theme which gets elevated and sits perhaps as a, however we frame it in the final plan, an elevated cross-cutting theme. Margaret.
I really appreciate Josh's comment about acknowledgement of racism, that it's systemic in our nation and our own community is not immune. And I think that acknowledgement needs to be made. I think we also need to acknowledge that our community is having trouble having this conversation. And I am deeply humbled and hopeful in the conversation that we're having as a group. I think it's a conversation our community needs to have. And if this is a plan for the next 10 years, how does it include the need for inclusion and this ongoing conversation that needs to happen among different communities that hasn't happened. And how does it strive to be inclusive? And I sort of also wonder that inclusion of equity, and I think it often happens at the end of the conversation, we add this piece and this equity piece. Maybe in itself, it needs to be its own goal, in the sense that equity is not included as an afterthought, but instead it is the conversation that needs to happen. It is, and in one way, I kind of think of it, it's the table, right? Equity is the table, and housing, governance, economic stability, all are seated around the table. But at the head of the table is equity. And if we really believe that, then the insertion of equity at different points doesn't really do justice to that idea of equity being at the table. Or is it an explicit statement to say, to acknowledge, as Josh said, this isn't concern for the community. At times, it doesn't feel like an inclusive community. And how does it strive towards that? Like, how does it grow and learn? As we are doing in this conversation, listening and hearing and acknowledgement, it's very hopeful. But how do we strive to do that for the next 10 years and build a place for our young people? My son, 17, will be 27, 10 years, where he is a member of this community and can say, I feel like I belong. I feel like I'm seen. I feel like I'm heard. I feel like I'm represented in the economic structure, in the governance structure. I have equal access to quality schooling. I have equal access to economic opportunities, regardless of the color of his skin. So how does that happen 10 years from now? How do we strive for that? Do I really believe in 10 years we'll be to that place? I don't know, but I want to hope for that for my young people at home and for all of our children. So I wonder what that looks like. What is the outcomes? I think someone else talked about what are the outcomes at the end that we're really looking for that really help the community move forward. And I think that's a good conversation also for us to think about. And I thank everybody for their honesty and their ability to have this conversation. It's extremely hopeful in a time when it's challenging to have these conversations and always be hopeful.
Great. Thank you, Margaret, for that. Others? I don't see any hands presently, but give it a moment. I see Carolina and Jessica. I'm not sure who came up first. I'll give Jessica the floor.
I was gonna let Carolina go next. So I really appreciate that that metaphor, Margaret. Although when I'm in a committee with a lot of educators, and I worry that I'm not using metaphor right. But I appreciate the idea of the table and thinking about, how do we have? I guess this seems like I'm also just grateful for this conversation and everyone's openness, and they're willing to be uncomfortable and be a little vulnerable tonight. But I think it's a good time to think about the plan that we have, and if we were looking at all of the topics through from the perspective of, or beginning with equity, are there things that we have missed? And I think Josh Fiala, I appreciate you pulling out the goals, because I think it's very helpful to see kind of what we do have. And as people who've been a part of this process, all along, whether committee members or the public who've been following along, I'm the one who always gets stuck between goals and tactics. So, so that for me, that's, I think I I think about it as a lot of those tactics are places where we really can start to target and be clear around, for instance, in governance, not just having a goal, but setting some metrics, right? What is it that we're trying to achieve and how are we going to achieve it? And so I don't know that I have specific ideas. I guess I'd like to kind of pose that to the group around, what's a good way to reflect on what we have done so far and think about, what would it look like if kind of equity and inclusion and making sure that we had a community where really everybody is welcome and thriving. How does that change what we've done so far? And I think I also just would add, and actually this was Margaret made this point to me in a conversation over the weekend, so I want to give her credit for making me think about it more. But this is a year ago when we started our public process, right, was the very beginning of COVID. And what we know now is a year later, there are so many more people in our community who are hurting, right? It's been a really devastating year for a lot of people. And so I think that also, as I see the 1-year anniversaries of lockdown, I think that's also a good reflection point for us, right? Around, are the things that when people answered a survey a year ago, their economic situation might be very different from what it is now, right? Or their concerns about education, or how they think about using parks and sidewalks, right? I mean, I think that's changed for a lot of us. And so it's I think it's a good time to pause and think about it from that perspective too, kind of just what views and how has our approach actually privileged the existing system as opposed to the system that we're trying to create.
Thank you, Jessica. Carolina.
Thanks, Josh. I just wanted to just acknowledge sort of the reasons why I do this work. So I think for me, community is a really important piece of the puzzle as we're doing planning. We can't have planning without people. And for me, I think it's incredibly important for us as not just whatever it is that we create at the end of the tunnel, whatever master plan document, website, PDF, whatever it might be, that really doesn't exist without the people moving it forward and without all of us in the community really being able to act on that. And so for me, process is really important because to me, process is the project, is the work that we do, right? To bring that forward. And so I think I just wanted to say I want to recommit to that in this project. I know we've had a lot of plans with the outreach working group, with the work that Michelle has been doing, and with the work that, I want to acknowledge all the hard work that the outreach working group has been thinking about in terms of diversifying that group, but also really want to think about how does the outreach working group work with the committee more strongly, and how do we really weave the fibers together so that we can actually make the connections we need to act on the goals that we're setting forth within this racial equity context. And so I just want to bring that forward. And as the person sort of thinking about the engagement for the project and making sure we have more voices in the room, also recommitting to what that looks like for the long term, and thinking about the implementation as the plan as we move forward. So I'm hopeful for that, and I'm hopeful that we'll work together more on an individual basis to bring that forward in the planning process, and that you'll allow me to let me reach out to you more directly and have more of these conversations as we're trying to connect with community members. So I just want to reemphasize that.
Thank you, Carolina. And we will have some of that, some detail around some of those comments on a later slide when we talk about some of the efforts that are currently underway. So that's a good preview for that too. Andrew, I see your hand up.
Sorry for the background noise. I have a family cooking dinner around me. You'll see me directing my.
Hi.
Thank you. Anyway, there was something I wanted to express about this, which is, I think, a useful way of, for me, framing inclusiveness in the master plan is to make it clear that there's something in that for everyone. We've talked about race here because that was the context in which it came up, but I think it extends well beyond that. I think it extends to gender, sex, national origin, religion, and perhaps most difficult of all, socioeconomic class. You shouldn't feel like you are excluded because you're poor versus wealthy. And so I think broadening the focus may get buy-in from everyone.
Thank you, Andrew. I see Margaret has your hand up. Yes.
Yeah, I just want to, just following up on that comment, when we broaden it, we have to be careful not to minimize the issues of racism as they exist in our nation. So
I would not suggest anything other than that. No.
yeah,
I was not going there.
Yeah, so just to and I appreciate your clarification, because I think when we say, oh, we should be inclusive, sometimes that is interpreted by communities as saying, we're going to minimize the issues of racism as they exist. And we just have to make sure, as I think Josh Donati said, well, we just have to acknowledge. And I think that being inclusive of other groups is important. I think it also helped me think about that our town is struggling with this idea and definition of equity versus equality. And I think this is a nationwide discussion, right? Is we want equality, and sort of defining equity as we think about there are specific populations that need different things. As a community, we plan really specifically to support our elderly, our aging, right? We have a very specific, we have services toward our youth. We have a disability commission that is deeply engaged in making sure there's access for those who are disabled. So how do we define equity so that it is also inclusive of race, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, as well, recognizing that different communities have different needs, and what are those specific needs? And I think in the town we're grappling with this idea of equality versus equity, but we already do some things that are different for specific populations. And because we believe that those specific populations have different needs. And so what are the needs of our BIPOC community? What are the needs of our LGBTQ community? What are the needs of those who are struggling with poverty? And how does a master plan for the next 10 years provide for equitable access to those communities already? I think is an important conversation, just building off the last comment.
Thank you for that, Margaret. And yes, Sharna.
So I want to thank Jay for his apology. I accept your apology, Jay. And I want to thank Josh and Jessica for your kind words this evening. And I want to thank Jeremy for reaching out to me, and a special thanks to Justin for reaching out to me immediately after our last meeting to express how you felt and to check in on me. I really appreciate that. While I can appreciate everyone's comments tonight, and as I sit here and try to process a lot of what you've said, one thing is kind of sticking with me, which is that what I'm hearing is that we are trying to figure out what should be put into the master plan with regards to equity. And I think we're almost making assumptions as to what our community's needs are. Yet we are the committee here, and we haven't spoken to the community to find out what those needs are. And I don't feel that, being the only person of color on this committee, that I am the authority and can speak for every person of color in our community. So what I would like to suggest is that we have another open house, add another open house onto the agenda that focuses on equity and inclusion. And maybe that at that open house, we face our painful history, because we have a large swath of our community that may still be in denial that redlining even existed, that systemic racism even existed in our community. So let's present the facts. Let's present the history, as painful as it may be. Let's deal with the reality that was. And let's hear the stories of our residents who live here now. Let's learn what their experiences have been, because a person's perception is in fact their reality. What I'm hearing from a lot of our community members who are in disbelief that there has been any type of racism at all here at all, is that if they didn't see it or witness it, it didn't happen. And that's just not true. That's not a reality. So as difficult as these conversations may be, and as silent as everyone was at the end of our last meeting, because it might have been stunning or shocking, and as pregnant as that pause was, it was indicative of a larger conversation that needs to happen. And as uncomfortable as that conversation may be, it needs to happen. And our town needs to have the opportunity to have that uncomfortable conversation to say to people of color, what has your experience been? We want to hear from you. We want to hear from our LGBTQ community. What has your experience been? Share that with us. And only then, when we hear what those stories have been, can we determine what needs to be put into that master plan, what we need to do to make the future brighter, to make everyone feel that they belong in this community, that this community has opportunity, that this community has equal access for each and every one of us. That's what I would like to see. I think that's a good starting point, rather than having all of us get together and try to assume that we know what people need.
Thank you, Shona, for that. That's excellent direction and guidance. I will just make a comment on that too. My intention putting those on the screen was not to, as you suggest rightfully, have the committee make assumptions about those, but that's kind of a reflection of where we have currently set those goals, and also have processes, as we'll show in a later slide, to broaden our outreach and the connection to voices that are underrepresented, which we know they are in our process. But I really like your idea of an additional open house focused on a calling together in the broader community stage around this topic of race and equity, and kind of laying everything out in a very honest and uncomfortable way, and then having a conversation around that. And I agree with you. It's only once we hear what that conversation brings up that we will know better. We'll probably still not have exactly the right answers, but we'll know better perhaps where to start with those types of goals and actions in the master plan. And then I think probably too, the direction that we were headed in, which was one perhaps focused also on smaller group settings, which might create a more comfortable and safe space for certain groups to engage with our process, might also need to occur as well, in addition to a larger meeting like that. So we have some work to do to act upon, I think, what we've rightfully put in front of us. Nathan.
Hey, no, before we go
Oh,
to
sorry.
Nate, I see
Yeah.
Shaw would like to be, we haven't heard from Shaw. Is he somewhere? I think he's on iPhone. Sorry,
No, I'm
sorry,
I'm
Nate.
right there.
Oh, there you are. Hey.
So Sharna, thank you so much for what you just said, and everything resonated beautifully. I just want to take a moment to say a couple of things about personal experience, if I may. To me, the essence of what we have to bring to this table is an opening of heart. And I say that from the basis of being perhaps the longest standing citizen of this town on this committee. And, you know, I recommend to you Isabel Wilkerson's beautiful book called Cast to get an understanding of how that heart has to be opened. She also wrote The Warmth of Other Suns about the Great Migration from the South of African-American populations to the North and West. But if you will indulge me for a minute, you know, I grew up here starting in 1955, the year after Brown versus Board of Education, and 7 years after Shelley against Kramer, which I drew to the attention of all the committee members. And in that town, of course, the population was as close to being 100% white as you could have it. It was so for a variety of reasons, which we'll get into. But, you know, as a young boy, I had the opportunity to go to Nate Turner's Tidewater area and reflect upon that rebellion in ways that I can share at more length some other time. And in 1963, I had spent a weekend with Martin Luther King as a young boy, long story on that, and marched with him in 1965. I saw the impact that George Wallace had on national politics and the impact he had on Dedham politics. And I've recited those facts to everybody. Moving forward from there, it is astonishing for me to recollect that following Shelley against Kramer, the United States Supreme Court held that restrictive covenants and deeds were actually privately enforceable between one citizen and the next, but they could not be enforced by the state because the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment did not reach to private discrimination. That's 1948, about the time I moved to Dedham. Today, it is illegal to have such covenants. It is illegal to have anybody or any institution prohibit any person of any race, color, or creed from having access to the housing of a community. You know, and I mention this because in that history of time, which seems maybe ancient to some, but to me is near and present. I mean, I was so stunned by the presentation of the Dedham Historical Society that, and grace to you, Sarah McDonald, for having brought it to our attention, put it on the before us, when a forebear by the name of Shaw, Robert Gould Shaw, who was a member of the Massachusetts 54th Regiment, trained in Dedham to go to Fort Wagner, and all recounted in the beautiful film called Glory. And tracing from that time through my boyhood to present, all I can say is that I think our community's heart has opened very considerably. And I think it's a function of you know, of law, truthfully. I think it's a function of conversation and widening of hearts of the community. Is our work undone? Absolutely it is. And I just want to bring to the attention of this committee that I have had, and Jessica Porter encouraged me to draw this to your attention tonight. I have had the opportunity to spend some considerable time with the owner of Central Cleaners, who is a woman who comes from the province adjacent to Wuhan and actually to the south, and runs our central cleaners. She has been the object of repeated comments by people coming in and challenging her as to why she has a right to stay in this country and why should she, as the purveyor of the Chinese flu and the Chinese virus, be allowed to stay in our community. She has received these insults. She had one day when I went to see her to talk about a few things, and she knows I'm a lawyer, there was a pile of dog feces that was left on the front of her door. My point being is that, you know, our community is not free from all those viruses that have infected American life for that period of time that I've recounted. It is here, is present, it's now, is today. And it is something that we all have to understand and bring an open heart to that community of persons who have graced us with their presence. A population which in 1990 constituted less than 3% of our community. And if, Josh, if your figures are accurate, today there are 16% of the community. The community that we refer to includes people of various self-identified racial backgrounds, but as the speakers in the Dedham Historical Society video showed, it also includes people who have diversity within their own houses. Like for example, my wife's brother who's married to a woman who comes from Mali, who is African, as you might know, and Muslim, who brings her children up in Roman Catholic schools, interestingly enough. But my point being that we are being blessed by all that has happened in America. And if we keep our hearts open and tell our community that that's one of the requirements of our lives, that our entire community keep their hearts open, I think we'll make great progress. I think we can look to our heart rather than sort of the narrow words and phrases of a particular master plan. That's a personal statement I wanted to make. I'm sorry it took so much time, but it's important to me to say it. And as for what we can do in the master plan, I'll leave that to other meetings in other days. Thanks.
Thank you, Josh. Sorry, Jimmy. Nate, over to you.
Sorry, just I think that what Charna said was great, and essentially what a number of other people had said, though, that raising DEI to its own topic comes with the treating it like something that's important, that we have a presentation on it, that we do the research, that we come up with specific goals that we would like to see, and then get to the tactics that Jessica was talking about. But I do think we should have a series of explicit goals. And so what Josh had said, that this is not, we shouldn't be trying to whittle around the edges and do what's the least painful. We should be clearly calling out what we would like to see, and it should be a vast improvement. Even Shaw, that we've gotten better over the last however many years. We're not looking to get a little bit better. We should be defining what we want, and what we want is a lot better. It's not having these horrible conversations regularly on Facebook or whatever, or like even having to have walking to a Black Lives Matter march, and my neighbors yell racist things to the group of us walking down, and at least 6 or 7 people honk horns and yell racist things in Dedham Square, on a weekend, Saturday or whatever. So, there's absolutely no question that there's monumental room for improvement, and so I just don't think that putting it in here, putting it in there, making minor improvements is what we want to do. I think we should be explicit that it's a goal. We should have the whole, I agree, the get together and ask for community involvement. But then I do want to appreciate too that I know there's been a lot of outreach. So I know that your team has done a lot to try to get more feedback. I think we can do more, and we'll try for that. But I also know that part of it is there is some challenges getting representation in these meetings, and so it's going to be something that we have to work on over time. And so I hope our goals for getting representation is in the master plan itself, and then through governance and life in Dedham over the next decade plus. So, anyways, but having it as a dedicated focus, I think, will help a lot of that.
Thank you, Nathan. I think that, yeah, it does seem, based upon many of your comments this evening, that we're starting to triangulate on a little bit different approach from where we have been, which is good to get this to a more concrete idea about how we can advance race and equity, at least in the master plan, that will hopefully result in changes beyond the plan. Other thoughts, comments?
One other thought that I have is just, maybe we should consider extending our timeline for completion of the master plan, given that, we've been hindered by COVID. And the reason I say that is because when you look at community outreach and when you look at involvement, you have to meet people where they are sometimes. And that might mean us going out into the community rather than expecting the community to come to us. And when I think of where we can best meet the community where they are, I think of the obvious, like Dedham Day. Or I think of, Dedham youth basketball on a Saturday afternoon, Saturday morning through Saturday afternoon, where there are games all day long. That's where we could meet the community where they are. But given COVID, obviously those things haven't happened. So maybe we should look to extending our timeline for completion of the master plan. So when those things open back up again, we can meet the community where they are and continue that engagement and continue those opportunities for inclusion. Just to throw that out there, as an opportunity before we wrap everything up and complete it.
Thank you, Sharna. I hope that happens sooner than later.
Yes, we all do.
Unfortunately, yeah. I don't think any of us has a crystal ball, but no surprise if we all do our part, that day might come sooner. And I think we all look forward to that, and we'd love to do that. Someone had their hand up, or Sarah. Thank you. Sorry.
Yeah, I actually just want to build on what Sharna said, because it does reflect some conversations I had individually with committee members since our last meeting. Just recognizing that at this moment, the conversation we had here tonight is actually deeper and more uncomfortable than ones I've had with people I spend lots of face-to-face time with, right? People I'm related to, or people that I call close friends. And the fact that we haven't, as a committee, been able to kind of build the relationships between ourselves, the informal sort of stuff, the getting to know you piece, I think is important for us to be as strong as we can also in reaching out in the community, right? And providing ultimately what we want to be a pretty united front on how we get to the recommendations in the plan, right? Like I want us to, as a group, feel good about and positive about and optimistic about and actionable towards what comes out in a final plan, so that we can work with the variety of stakeholders it's going to require to make these pretty ambitious and wide-ranging goals we've talked about happen. So I do think coming back to MAPC and to Jeremy and the staff to look at what the plan looks like moving forward and where we can think about engagement, if it means drawing it out a little bit to get beyond a safe place for us to gather, even in small groups. I think that that's important to consider.
Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, we do. I think we have, I will be a little shy in terms of providing the direct answer to these types of things right now, but I think, yeah, we have some thinking to do about the process between now and completion, whatever that completion date may be, and need to consider all of this and how we're proceeding, which is, you'll see in the next steps, was one of our next steps anyway. We need to define beyond this phase, of which the last open house is at the end of this month. The next phase where we have rough outlines of what it needs to accomplish. We don't have that next phase as defined as the one we're leaving now. So I think we do have flexibility in how we approach it, and align with the thoughts we're hearing from you all tonight, the really productive ideas. Looks like Andrew, you have your hand up again.
The end of the day,
Just a timing comment. If we extend the deadline, extend the process, I wouldn't want to tack this on at the end of it as an afterthought. It feels like something we need to deal with now.
So what did they talk about in the assembly?
Immediate, because you're going to weave it through the whole plan, so it needs to be there sort of from the beginning. And that means having that conversation now, and now we're still in the middle of COVID, so we have this timing problem. I wouldn't want to wait till that was over and everyone can meet in person to sort of delay that conversation. Sorry, I'm caught up on logistics. Sorry.
No, I'm not suggesting that we delay any conversations. I was just suggesting that we use every opportunity we can to engage more public comment in our planning process. And if that means dragging this out until we have more opportunity for public engagement, then that should be something to be considered. We shouldn't delay any conversations, not at all.
We both know how to play instruments.
Great. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Sharna.
Jessica?
Thanks. So I want to, I feel like this has been a really rich conversation, and it's easy to have these conversations and then have great ideas and then move on and miss, kind of lose the momentum. And so I'm just, I guess, partly wanting to make sure that we've really articulated. I think there's a few different ideas that aren't necessarily contradictory, but I just want to make sure that we're kind of articulating those, and then actually just get a sense from the committee about whether we want to make specific decisions about a way forward right now, or if we want to send, the kind of leadership team back to come back with proposals in terms of what happens. But I guess what I'm hearing is, I heard an idea that we should actually create a topic area around, I don't know if it would be race, equity, inclusion. I don't know. I think that's probably what the topic would be. But so I heard that as an idea in terms of just actually thinking about it really as, this is like public health. It's everything is interconnected, right? It's everything is interconnected. But to really just say, let's have a topic area to make sure that we are really focused on this and thinking about how it connects across town and across all the other topics. I heard idea of a forum specific. I think if we made it a topic area, that would make sense, right? We'd have open house, and it's like a natural approach as a part of that. I know I was thinking about that we should be doing another survey, right? And looking for other ways to collect data right now, focus groups. And then I also heard in general ideas around kind of re-examining everything that we've done so far to think about from this perspective. I actually think that if we were to just decide now that we are going to have an additional topic area and commit to that now, I understand that there are going to be implications in terms of, the contract, the timeline, et cetera. But it actually would dovetail, I think, nicely with the fact that, I agree with Sharna and others that, the more that we can be out and start to get out and meet people where they are, right? That is becoming, I have a hope of being able to do that in the coming months. That we'll be extending the timeline anyway. And we'll have to kind of think about how to do that from a budget perspective and, again, logistics, but I think it's possible. So I guess I'm just wondering, I'm worried about moving on without kind of having some kind of concrete next steps. And so I would say, I think one option is that we take this conversation, distill it, and come back at our April meeting with a suggestion. Another would be that if there is, strong support from the committee tonight and people feel like this is viable and we should establish another topic area, then I would say we have, I think, the best attendance we've ever had. This would be the time to actually, do that as a committee and take that vote. So I wanted to throw that out and just not move on before we had some kind of steps.
In Jessica, if I may, and Diekman, I'll recognize you in a sec. I would say, logistics stuff like extending this out another year. I think, we can't make a decision on that tonight. There's, as well-meaning as that is, we'd have to think about that. What does that mean to the budget, timing, et cetera? But I mean, it's, it's still on the table, but I definitely would hesitate on, this board making that decision, or this committee tonight.
Right. Yeah. To clarify, I guess I'm thinking, in general, a topic area ends up being a 6 to 8 week process. We kind of do the research, have an open house, whatever it is. If it was consistent with others, I don't think that adds a year.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think it needs a year.
Yeah. I mean,
But
it would be great to have a year to talk about race and inclusion in Dedham, but
yeah, I don't think it needs a year.
yeah.
Diekman, the floor is yours.
Sorry, yeah, I think I feel bad I'm a little bit late, but I definitely agree with the wrap up that Jessica had, and sort of putting a logical planning process to this topic area is key. I'm also wondering,
Diekman, you're kind of fading in and out. Sorry, I don't want to interrupt, but I want to
guess
capture.
how about, is this better?
That sounds better. Thank
I'll
you.
get closer to my laptop. I'm also wondering about, it seems like there are other town committees and organizations that are starting to grapple with this as well. Is there a way that we can sort of not necessarily think of this as something that it's just our committee that's looking into this and delving into it? We know, school committees doing things, and I'm assuming other town committees are as well. Is there some kind of larger effort that we could be a part of rather than taking it all on ourselves? Or maybe it is just us.
It certainly is not just us. There are a number of larger efforts. I know that there are a number of South Shore communities who are doing some collaborative work around the topic of equity and inclusion. So it is not just us. So there are some opportunities to collaborate with some other communities, but I think before we do that, we need to tackle this as a community of our own first. I think that's important for us to know where we stand first.
Yeah.
May I ask Sharna some questions? Sharna, do you have in mind that we need additional community outreach because we haven't heard enough feedback so far? Is that a premise of your thought, or is it that we have been somewhat stilted in that because it's been in a COVID Zoom-based environment? Or I just want to tease out your thinking a little bit there.
So my thinking on this is twofold, Shaw. First off, I think that is in all of the meetings in the meetings that we've had, we've gone through the slides pretty quickly on the redlining and on the changing demographics of Dedham. And I think that the community as a whole could benefit from learning that history. So I think it would be an opportunity for us to educate the community itself on Dedham's history with redlining and with systemic racism, because there are a large number of people in our community who don't believe that. So if we have an opportunity to share that information, I think we should do so. So that's one reason for having an open house around this topic. And then secondly, I feel that we should, we have not had a lot of input from communities of color around the entire master plan to date, as we know, not because we haven't tried, I'm not going to say that, we faltered in our efforts, but I think that as the topic of race has risen throughout the past few months in our community, I think people are paying more attention now. And so I think that if we outreached again, we would get certainly more participation than we have in the past. And I think that if we are going to include initiatives around equity in the master plan, that we should want to hear from more people before we determine what those initiatives should be. So I'm asking that we go back and do some more outreach before we determine amongst ourselves what those initiatives should look like. That's what I'm suggesting.
You know what your thoughts prompt in my mind? Two things. First, I think we ought to keep the metal to the pedal, or pedal to the metal, or whatever, pedal to the metal as much as we can. Keep moving this process along at our end as fast as we can. However, at the same time, I think this is an ideal opportunity to try to reach out and do a collaborative symposium with several bodies in the town. In other words, recommend that we get the Dedham Historical Society, the Human Rights Commission, the Select Board, and others, and have a sort of a special dedicated, publicly embraced session on this topic, in which we can draw from in our work. In other words, not putting the burden entirely on this committee, but to have the work that we've done to date be the reason for prompting that dialogue. So
and just to be, I that's what I had meant as well. I didn't mean to go to other towns other than Dedham. Sorry to interrupt.
Right. Well, so you hear what I'm saying, that I think that this process is kind of a long one as it is. And when we do the master plan, we're going to have implementation phase as well. And, just judging from what we did 10 years ago, this has been much more elaborate, much more inclusive, great deal more outreach, et cetera, et cetera. But I think this topic begs a community discussion. I think we should use some of the rich offerings that have come from various organizations and suggest that we ought to have a concurrent symposium going on this topic.
And to be honest with you, Shaw, and maybe Sarah McDonald can talk a little bit more about this, the town has engaged with a consultant by the name of Colette Phillips, who is actually highly respected and one of the most sought after consultants in this arena, who can facilitate this exact kind of symposium that you're speaking of. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah to let us know where the select board is in those conversations with Colette, because that is why the town engaged with her in the first place.
Super. By the way, I know Colette very well from the Obama world. So
yeah. So right. So you agree with me that she's highly respected and highly decorated, and she's the absolute person who should be doing this work with us.
I met with her for 90 weeks straight, so I know her.
Okay. Sarah?
Thank you, Sharna. And in the interest of honesty and transparency that we have tonight, I hope this doesn't come across uninformed. But yes, so actually last summer, after the murders of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, and some statements from myself and other members of the select board, we did, working with the Human Rights Commission, seek out Colette's help to put together a race forum. And I know Jim McDonald from my board was working with Joe Borsellino, the chair of the Human Rights Commission, and the folks at the Anti-Racism Coalition of Dedham, working to plan that forum. It's my understanding that, for reasons I'm not entirely clear of, that planning has broken down a little bit, that there was not consensus on how to host a community-wide conversation while also keeping people of color and their experiences centered and protected and safe. And I honestly don't want to act as if I understand how we move forward from this, other than I have communicated with independently with the folks that I believe have been discussing that forum to figure out where we go from here. I do want to come back to Margaret's conversation and then turn it over to her because she's been waiting so patiently. But you know, this meeting tonight, this conversation tonight has been the most optimistic, positive, sort of meaty discussion on these topics that I've been a part of in the last year. And I've been a part of a lot of conversations. And I'm frankly honored and really excited by what I'm hearing from the group here in bringing these topics more front and center in our work, in what we do. So Margaret, I'll turn it over to you and your hand raised.
Thank you, Sarah. I just want to echo what Sharna said a little while ago that I think is important as we sort of are brainstorming. I'm a Latinx immigrant to this country, but I do not want to be the voice of the Latinx community in this community. I'm raising 2 multiracial children, Black Latinx children. I do not want to be the voice of the whole community, the whole BIPOC community. And I do think we need to engage those specific communities and aligning with other community groups. We have to remember that our governance structure in Dedham is white, mostly white. We have 1 Black member now of the school committee, and that's it. So engaging with other white folks to talk about the experience of racism and equity in the town will give us some information, but it's not going to give us the information we're looking for. We need to include, if we want to really say we're going to include equity, then we need to hear the voices of those communities. I would also disagree that our process has been inclusive, because if you look at some of the data, even that Josh shared today, it's not representative of the whole community. The last open house where we did talk about goals around the cultural goals of the master plan included 1 Latinx member, which was me, and maybe 1 other multiracial member, someone who identified as multiracial. That's not inclusive. It's not proportional to our community at all. So I don't believe we've been inclusive. And it's not for lack of trying or lack of outreaching, but it wasn't enough. And it hasn't had the outcomes that we needed in order for us to say that we've included those voices. It would be dishonest to say we've been, that the plan is inclusive of all those voices, not for lack of trying. I understand we tried and have done and brainstormed different ways, but that would not be true, and I would disagree with that. And so I just want to echo Sharna's comment that it not get lost, that it's specifically outreaching to those communities and asking them to share their experience, what their vision is for the town, and really specifically, and by aligning with other existing organizations, we may lose that.
Margaret, let me ask you something, if I may. My experience has been with master planning that it's a pretty boring topic, except for those people who don't find it boring. How do you get people who are, spend their days working very hard and have to, be at home with their families at night and or don't have a lot of spare time? How do you get them to come out to forums and discuss these topics that are required by our state law and required by our town bylaw? What's the mechanism for that, so that you feel that we have sufficient input.
I think Sharna gave us a good view to think about this. It's going to where the people are. It's looking at, this is relational work. It takes long-term relationship building, and that can't happen in a forum. Using traditional structures that are mostly bureaucratic and developed by, that are focused on a bureaucracy and a bureaucratic view isn't going to work. It's going to take smaller groups, focus groups, I think, and relational work and going to where the people are. I think if we use some of the resources of our town and some other ways, we can do this work. But I think Shauna's comment about being thoughtful about as things open up and how we take advantage of events that start to happen into the summer, into the fall, is a great opportunity for us to hear and include those voices.
Thank you,
Thank
Margaret.
you. Yeah, thanks for that.
And Josh, and thank you everyone for the time. And I don't want to be that person that does a time check, but realizing it's 8:40, and I know it feels like kind of a natural segue to talk about. We did prep some talking about what we're going to do as far as outreach, and I think we've articulated there's a lot of work to be done, and we've already hit all the points, and we were going to, I guess, reemphasize those points. We have much more work to do, and we wanted to begin that conversation of how we can do it better. It looks like we've already started that, but I'm hoping we can hedge towards that. And I know, Jessica, you wanted to talk about, is there some decisions we can make tonight? And I'm hoping we can accomplish both, but I'm realizing it's getting kind of late.
Yeah. So Jeremy, I'm going to suggest that we don't actually pull any more slides up tonight. I just think that we're in this space. We're having a great conversation. And I know there's some members of the public who are here who'd like to chime in at some point. And so I think that, I think we have this question first of, so I think the engagement piece is very important, but I don't know that we can make any decisions about engagement until we think about how are we going to kind of revise what we're doing, right? I think that is actually, that's the question now, is how do we make sure that we're setting that, so equity is kind of the center at the table, or, Margaret said it much more eloquently. And so I would suggest that we do, I just would like to hear from the committee about the idea of, and I can drop it or whatever, I just feel like we have momentum now, right? Is like, if we're going to decide to add another topic area now, that's something that we could do tonight. We could have the public talk, and then we could, we do have this, the working group, and I know Michelle and Carolina have been doing a lot of work, and a lot of the relational work that Margaret's talking about in terms of, having conversations to start to get ideas, make connections, build relationships, and also come up with a really concrete list of some of the events, organizations, churches, et cetera, where we can actually go to them and meet people where they are. So I think some of that is working. I just think that if we start to pull slides up now, we're going to lose some of the momentum that we have. So that would be my suggestion in terms of the rest of our time.
Just a quick note. Just a quick note. People, the full slide deck you have, it was sent to you earlier today, and you can see there's data. We're not hiding from it. There's data which shows the things you've been exactly talking about, that our process to date has not been as inclusive as we would like it to be, and so we're taking actions to try to rectify that.
Yeah, I should just clarify. I'm not suggesting that we don't look at the slides for that reason. I just think we've already said that. I think it's really, if you haven't looked at the slides, that I would encourage you to do it. It's really striking. Josh did a great job of showing from our open houses, what percentage of people, what percentage of attendees are white who attended relative to our population. So it's very powerful. I just worry once we aren't all seeing each other on the screen, it changes the dynamics of the conversation.
Yep, it's great.
And Sharon, I think I spoke over you. I apologize.
No,
You're saying
I was
something?
just gonna suggest that because we're running out of time, that maybe we open it up for public comment, and then maybe at our April meeting, we decide whether we're going to either add this as a separate topic area, or if we're going to have another open house and then incorporate equity throughout the existing topic areas. We can make that decision in April, but maybe we use the rest of the time this evening to hear public comment. Since we have such great attendance tonight, I'm sure there are a lot of people who have something they want to say.
I like that idea.
I have
Andrew?
those occasionally, Jeremy.
No, all the time, Sharna. Thank you. Andrew, real quick.
Would it be helpful to have our MAPC folks have a straw man of what that might look like? If we, not necessarily draft the goal, but sort of an idea of what it might look like if we wanted to vote on adopting a goal. Have something in front of us to think about.
And Josh, not to put you on the spot, I mean,
well, I mean, we, between now and April, when we come back to you all to meet in April, we're planning on having a more concretely defined next phase. And so I think we could do potentially a little bit of thinking in terms of, not that it's an on-off switch, but if we head in this direction, the next phase might look like this. If we head in this direction, it might look like this. A little bit of just kind of choose your own adventure for the committee, and then we can decide which looks better as a group. But that's work we were planning to do, so I think that's fine.
thank you, Josh. Thank you, Andrew. So with that, happy to open up to the public, and thank you all committee members, for having that, starting the dialogue, and we're going to continue this. Obviously, a lot of food for thought. But if anyone from the general public, and thank you all for joining us and sticking with us and listening, and happy to hear from you. And feel free to raise your hand.
And I think I've just made it possible for everyone in the group or everyone in the room to turn their video on themselves. So you can try to do that so you can be recognized a little easier. Or if that's not possible, you can. In participants, you should have an option to use the raise your hand function, which makes it a little easier to see you as well.
Or if none of those things are working for you, put something in the chat so we can try and troubleshoot.
And I see Andrew has his hand up. Hi, Andrew. Thank you.
Hi, so I just wanted to inquire about how the committee feels about single family zoning. Probably a bit late now to have a full discussion at the time, but I just want to know for future reference. Like most of our town is zoned to only fit one household per lot. And I personally feel that limiting so much land in our town encourages higher housing prices, which would contradict tonight's theme about equity. So I just wanted to say that I think loosening some of our zoning restrictions could alleviate that affordable housing crisis, which is becoming apparent in Dedham. I just wanted to throw that out as food for thought tonight.
I'm happy to start, Josh, and maybe you can follow up. We have articulated that our zoning, most of the minimum lot sizes to build a single family home are 12,000 square feet and up. And we found that there's a stark mismatch between that number and the actual lot sizes, which prevents accessibility of housing. And that's one of the, I think we've all addressed that that's a barrier to providing housing, and that's an equity issue. And that's a very sensitive one I'll bring up, and it's been a challenge, and every city and town kind of has this high bar to actually establish a new home. And it's been, I think we can be frank, it's been discriminatory, and it's finally, I wouldn't say it's gaining momentum statewide, but it's being a little more recognized that there's this mismatch that's really preventing people from realizing the American dream and keeping people out. And I think we've realized that. I think, Josh, correct me if I'm wrong, we have that as a goal, that there's a mismatch in our housing, both in the portfolio and our zoning laws. And we haven't, and the next step is, what are we going to do about that and to reach that goal, Andrew?
That's correct. And I would refer you, Andrew, or others to on the website, designingdedham2030.org, we do have a housing topic summary, which does include the goals outlined for that topic, which do point in the direction that you're suggesting, in which Jeremy just outlined that there's a housing and zoning mismatch. So you can find more information about that there. I thought I saw another hand up as well. I've lost it now.
Thank you, Andrew, too.
Yes, thank you for that comment. I think it was Joseph Borsellino, if I remember correctly.
Okay, I can get on. Hi, I'm Joseph Borsellino, Sharna's husband, and I'll just speak just for 2 or 3 minutes on some of the issues that you've all covered tonight, because they have been covered extensively by us at the Human Rights Commission with every department of government in the town. And I would say to everybody in the town that the language that everyone's using tonight, willing to say words like systemic racism and white privilege and concepts that you accept because you understand them, are characteristic with almost every department of government that we've interacted with at the Human Rights Commission. We have built very strong relationships with the Historical Society, with the town manager, with the police chief, and we freely talk in this very way with a level of comfort and are able to address all of these issues. The only group that we have not been able to speak with this level of fluidity and freeness is with the select board. The select board process has been intimated, has started in last July when I first met with Colette Phillips to get the process started, and have worked rather tirelessly to try to have a town-wide conversation of the kind that you've been contemplating here tonight. And that was really the one stumbling block. So what we did as the conversation persisted is we sought out the communities of color and leaders of color who had the greatest access to the town and would be able to bring forward people who would do what Margaret Adams is suggesting, speak for themselves so that those in leadership weren't speaking for them. So we opened up the Colette Phillips communications to the Anti-Racial Coalition and invited the administrators of the Anti-Racial Coalition. We have one employee of color and only one who's a long-term employee. Her name is Angela. She's a social worker for the Dedham Youth Commission, and she has extensive access to families and children of color, and particularly the high school students. They speak and they meet and they converse year round. They have groups and organizations. They call themselves Real Talk and others. She mobilized those children that grew up in our grade schools and went through our high schools, and at great risk to themselves and vulnerabilities shared their experiences over their lifetimes in Dedham with our select board members, with police chief, with certain school committee members and other leaders. And the expectation was that that was going to draw a positive response and an acceptance of the needs for diversity, equity, and inclusion. The school went on to hire a equity and inclusion coordinator, which is an African-American Cuban woman. Rather than that happening, what happened instead was a significant backlash from a population in Dedham who have been resisting anything that even sounds like equity or that even sounds like reconciliation with the realities of systemic racism. On the first day of Dr. Fox Roy's hire, I was getting telephone calls and emails referring to her as a racist and condemning me and the Human Rights Commission for hiring her as a racist to put in charge of our children, without any regard to the fact that she's a town employee that went through a very extensive hiring process and that the Human Rights Commission played no role in, other than to have one of many participants on the board. The select board is very afraid to even use the word equity because of this group of people in town. They won't even say it. If any of you saw the school committee meeting in late January, 282 citizens showed up for the school committee meeting because these very issues were being talked about. And this particular group was mobilizing itself to have the superintendent of schools fired. They are presently mobilizing to disband the Human Rights Commission and to have it cease and desist, and are demanding FOIA requests. They want a list of everybody that we've ever interviewed and talked to that would substantiate that there's racism or systemic racism. Our commission put out a 12-page single-space extensive study from the beginning of the United States all the way up to the present, showing how, not just in Massachusetts, but in all of the United States intentionally segregated the metropolitan areas, and that in Massachusetts, the program was so effective that by the end of the 1970s, every single suburb in Greater Boston, with the exception of Cambridge, was 98% white. And the explanation was given, showing how the FHA played its role, how the National Association of Realtors played its role, how restrictive covenants played its role, et cetera, et cetera. We then combined with the Historical Society to do a I Am Dedham television show. And some of you, I guess, have seen it. I understand Sarah circulated it. So we have been doing this over the past year, and it has not educated, and it has not opened the hearts, as Shaw suggested. The hearts are hardened, and the hearts are angry, and they don't want to even let the truth trickle in to their minds or to their children's minds. They want to pretend like we live in a colorblind world where everybody has what they have because it's a measure of how hard they've worked. And the class that has almost nothing, some of you may know that there's 40 million African Americans in the United States. They own less than 2% of the wealth, and less than 0.5% of all capital in the United States is in the hands of people of color. So it's obscene. And to deny it is obscene. So you will have our support with the Human Rights Commission. I have no doubt that the Historical Society will participate as well. I have no doubt that Colette Phillips will participate as well. And I'm happy to also share with this group that over the last 3 months, I have been personally reaching out to select boards and human rights commissions in as every town that's our neighbor as possible. And I've been building alliances, have helped another town already set up a human rights commission of its own, and am trying to push for a regional approach to this because no single town can absorb the impact of residential segregation. If it flowed, all the consequences of residential segregation flows into one town without any regional adoption of these types of principles. You're going to get something like Brockton or something like one single city that absorbs all the flow in from an area while the others close their borders. I would encourage the group to keep open eyes on our neighbors as well. Needham has just put out a very intense statement that acknowledges systemic racism, that acknowledges that it needs to be dismantled, that acknowledges white privilege and the material advantages that it has given, and ultimately the way that the advantages were gotten and the way that the suburbs were built, there's simple formulas with employment, with access to capital, with mortgages and so forth. And that's going to have to be recognized, and that's going to have to be part of any plan when you're talking about equity. You know, it's going to have to find its way into these plans. It's going to affect hiring. It's going to affect the ability of people of color to borrow money and start a business, and then that business be patronized in our town. That contracts that our government gives out with our tax dollars, that some of those contracts are given to businesses of color, et cetera, et cetera. It's going to make people want to stay here and build their businesses and build their lives and so forth. So, so with all that said, please keep us appraised. Margaret Adams is one of our founders of the Human Rights Commission, and she tells our group everything about what happens in this committee, and will continue to do so. But with that backdrop, I'll close off for tonight. But and if any of you are inclined as well, I would consider attending the next select board meeting, because some of the assaults that I'm talking about are being planned to be raised Thursday night, and they're no more than attacks to have the DEI coordinator removed, to stop DEI from getting into our schools, and now attacks on the Human Rights Commission itself. We have one issue that we have to deal with, and I have no problem sharing it with you all. When we wrote our articles, we wrote a 13-person membership, and within that constitution, the membership were to be residents of the town. A lot of the key players in our government are not residents of the town. Our police chief lives in Westwood, our town manager's from New Hampshire, and I'm not sure where Dr. Fox Roy is, but these are people with the most knowledge in certain areas. Our commission has representatives from the police, from the schools, from aging, from disability, and they decide who sits on our commission. So we receive them. One of them does not have a Dedham resident address. So we'll have to address that. It's a legitimate point that will have to be addressed. The rest of it is not. The rest of it is extremely political, and it's extremely targeted to hurt. And some of you may know that a lot of people that supported DEI have been subjected to vicious harassment by outside right-wing groups. They've had their pictures posted and put on hate communications and websites. Myself, when I wrote the article for the Dedham Times, I had to deny having my picture put in the Dedham Times because of my concern that it would be also used in the same way and circulated. So recognize what you're up against. There is a certain population that we're talking about having these conversations. And the more the conversations are had, the impact is not having the effect that it's having with your group. It is hardening the heart even more. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you so much, Joe.
Hey, Joe, thank you for your work on that video. That was superb. Thank you.
I also appreciate in those comments the notion of a regional and collaborative approach, and can't help myself but to promote a recent program of MAPC, which is called REMAP, which is the Racial Equity Municipal Action Plan program. And so that program, not to say that we can't make a lot of progress through the master plan, but that's a program that's also specifically designed as a year-long effort, where the first 4 months are focused on training, reflection, and self-assessment within a municipality. And then the final 8 months are developing a racial equity municipal action plan. So there's other activities which could potentially be a recommendation of our planning process to pursue as a next step that's very tangible for the town. That would then be a more in-depth analysis and approach to these, as Joseph has laid out for us, in sometimes intractable seeming issues. Other comments from the public? I'm not seeing others on my screen.
Josh, can I jump in a few thoughts? First of all, I do want to thank everybody tonight for having this conversation and broaching this subject, this topic. I want to thank the Human Rights Commission and ARCOD for all of the work that they've been doing. In our group, I've sort of had some other thoughts of maybe how we might go forward. Rather than having diversity, equity, inclusion as a separate topic, I'm wondering if at the next meeting, or if it's not the next because we already have an agenda, that we could strategize more as to how we can incorporate diversity, equity, inclusion into the topics that we have, and see if we can sort of break a little bit of the mold that we've approached those topics already a little bit. I'm wondering if we could have a report, simple report on the outreach working group, who they've talked to and what's come out of that. I know we get a little snippet at each meeting, but it'd be really great to hear a little more in detail on that, and then maybe use that to strategize on further on how we get more input and how we engage groups, whether maybe we bring some folks from ARCOD in to these meetings, have conversation. And then I'm also thinking that we need to do a bit of work on how we make all of this information much more accessible than we already have, in that I appreciate sort of the one-sheeters that we've had, because it does sort of have things graphically and numerically and you know, a bit of writing. So there's a variety of things there. There's still a lot of stuff on that page, but I'm sort of thinking that, you know, we've spent this last year going through multiple topics with a huge amount of information presented in a sort of seminar kind of format. And there's a huge amount of effort that I appreciate greatly that goes into that and doing that. But it's very much sort of, there's historic, and then there's the, you know, as we've brought up tonight, the input has come not from as varied a group as we might like. But that if we're working on a plan, then that plan has got to come out in a way that the most people possible can access it and can understand it. And that's going to be the best way that work can be done to implement what comes out of this.
Thanks, Justin, for those perspectives.
Anyone else? All right. Well, thank you all. I know it's been a long night, and I'm glad we had this conversation. Oh, yeah, Michelle?
So just as we close up the night, I do want to mention that Carolina and I have been having conversations with a wide range of residents in Dedham, just to be able to understand and to listen how we can better meet people where they are. Exactly what Margaret was saying, these relationships take time to build, but it's important to have those conversations right now so that we're not assuming what the next steps are, as opposed to now listening, understanding, and then developing some type of action plan to move forward with that. So I do want to welcome anyone that is interested in having conversations or would like to do so to either reach out to myself and Carolina. We would love to talk to you. We would love to listen, and we would love to learn and understand how to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. And so to wrap it up, a lot of food for thought. our next meeting is April 27th. So it's not going to be, I believe the third Tuesday of the week is April school vacation. And we don't want to conflict with that. And so we'll do the fourth Tuesday. I think we did that. I think we've done one before and it was still a successful night. And these Tuesdays, the third or fourth seems to be meet everyone's schedule. And so what we've heard, we have some next steps. Obviously, most importantly, immediately, we still want you to promote our open house again, March 30th. Please encourage folks to come out to that. We've had great attendance at each one of these, and you know we definitely have more work to be done when it comes to diversifying these open houses. So please help us get the word out as much as possible. And we provided convenient times for folks to drop in and drop out. I think that's a little more understandable if you want to come in for one topic, though we want to encourage you to stay for all, please. So please spread the word on that. And, you know, we're leaning on you to help us spread the word. And in addition to Michelle and the outreach community's effort. So thank you. We'll come back. We'll digest a bit of those open houses. We'll talk about the outreach. We'll talk about, you know, how are we going to change course for the rest of this project? And we'll provide some options and we'll continue this dialogue. And what has been, I think, you know, a dialogue that's had to happen. And I appreciate your honesty and, you know, providing your ideas to us and, you know, holding our feet to the fire too. Because, you know, we want this to be successful and there's still work to be done. With that, anyone have anything else to add? Jessica?
Yeah, I just want to thank everyone, all the committee members for, you know, being here. I know I had some anxiety, but you know, about this, and I think that makes sense. I expect other people did too. And I think that this is a good example of how, you know, it's super important to work through that, right? To face it, have uncomfortable conversations. We're all here still. Like, we all survived it, and which doesn't mean it's over, right? Because there's a lot more to come. But I thank the committee members. I thank the public, and so I just would thank and I kind of encourage all of you. And I think, you know, my guess is that this was on Facebook Live. I'm sure there are others who were watching who aren't here in the room now, and it'll be on our Designing Dedham 2030 webpage. But just for anyone who sees that, right, I hope that what you took away is a group that is, you know, struggling with a lot of positive intent and willing to work, and willing to listen and looking for, you know, we not only do we not have all the answers, we're still trying to figure out the questions. And I think that's exactly where we should be. And so I just appreciate everybody being on the journey. And I hope that for those who are seeing this, that you will encourage people to watch this, to check into the process, to give us feedback. And I can tell you just for myself, I'm always happy to take feedback, whether it's personal feedback or as, you know, what this group can be doing. So I hope people will keep talking.
Thank you, Jessica. With that, we'll see everyone March 30th, of course. And of course, then we'll see you in April. So please help us spread the word, and thank you once again. And we'll see you soon. Thank you, everyone.
Night.
Good night. Thank you.
Night, thank you.